conference realignment is not over. We still have a new wave that's just around the corner, but this isn't going to be like the conference realignment of the past when you have a few teams joining a new conference. No, this is going to be the conference realignment that assembles together college football super league, and it's coming a lot faster than what we initially expected. The SEC commissioner has been popping off as of late. He made some comments where he said, I have people in my room asking, why are we still in the NCAA? And when I saw this pop up, I initially thought, okay, the super leagues are coming, and I think we could see this happen as soon as 2027. You already have the SEC plus the Big Ten, the two powerhouses of college football right now, who have heavy influence over this sport at the moment. They have so much influence to the point where they have influenced the new upcoming playoff format. Now, it hasn't been finalized if it's going to be 14 or 16 teams, but the SEC and the Big Ten have been able to push their weight around, and they've gotten everything that they've wanted, and they got a bigger goal in mind outside of just trying to get more money, trying to get more revenue. They have 4 auto bids that they're going to get in the new playoff format. And that is all about control. Because when you control the postseason, you have control over the entirety of the sport. And here's a bigger picture. The SEC and the Big Ten, they are secretly planning an alliance. I heard Brian Kelly during the SEC spring meeting say that his proposal for how schedules should work is that you have your 9-game conference slate, then you play one Big Ten opponent, and then the school has their choice of picking from whoever they want to play in 2 out-of-conference games, not named the Big Ten. So this is similar to how the AFC versus NFC works in the NFL. And at this point, with what George Sankey said in his comments and with what Brian Kelly said with his schedule proposal, I have a lot of belief that college football is planning on breaking away from the NCAA. Because think about it. The NCAA has no control over the sport anymore. They don't have a say in the media rights deals that are negotiated by the conferences. They don't have any control over the transfer portal, and they're outdated when it comes to being able to handle name, image, and likeness, to the point where they have to give the issue to Congress to solve their own problems. And that alone further shows why the SEC and the Big Ten are justified to break away from the NCAA as a whole. And with the amount of control that they already have over the sport, the playoffs has nothing to do with the NCAA. It's not March Madness where the NCAA runs the postseason tournament. That's its own separate entity. And these conferences are their own separate entities also. So when George Sankey or Greg Sankey said that he has people asking, why are they still in the NCAA? It's a very good question. Why are you? The NCAA gives you no benefit. The main reason for the formation of the NCAA was to have every team, every conference under one umbrella, so the guidelines and regulations could be easily implemented. But now, with the NCAA being so incompetent at doing their job, the SEC is justified to just take it into their own hands along with the Big Ten and just say, let's just go ahead and form up the Super League. The SEC and the Big Ten, they're drawing the ratings, the audiences, the revenue. What does the SEC and the Big Ten need the NCAA for at this point when they don't do their job at all? It would be much easier to govern what's going on with the portal and NIL if you just took it into your own hands and you didn't have to worry about the NCAA. You know, they have very weird ways that they go about implementing punishment. Some teams get punished harsher than others for committing the similar offenses. And even when the NCAA does try to issue a punishment, nobody really takes them seriously. They just get sued to death. Now, what's going to happen when we get the formation of these super conferences is that, for one, you probably going to have a lot of lawsuits that happen. The G5 schools are probably going to say, oh, this isn't right. And then they're going to take it to court. They're going to be like, oh, this isn't, good for the competitive balance of the sport. And then you know what the Big Ten, the SEC are going to say? They're either going to give them a few ultimatums. They're going to say, you can sue us and maybe get a little bit of money in exchange, or you can play by our rules where you may have your own separate playoff. You know, that G5 playoff that Josh Pate has proposed that always gets a lot of backlash. Well, that realistically is on the table. And then you're going to have it where if they don't want to go through with having their own playoffs and they do want to have a seat at winning a national championship, the Big Ten, the SEC, they might just throw them a bone. They might say, you know what? We will allow one G5 team to get an automatic spot into the playoffs, but they won't be seated higher than 12th. So you'll have a really tough path to winning a national title. And if that's not good enough for them, then guess what? They can say, we're just going to alter the criteria so you don't even have a shot at getting into the playoffs and competing for a national championship. You can just stay a member of the NCAA. And of course, you can say that's unfair. Yeah, they can take them to court for it, but there is no rule that says that the CFP has to allow G5 schools in. This is an invitational playoff. So if you're not invited, there's nothing you can really do about it. There's no rules that says you got to have a G5 team in there. And yes, it is unfair. I'm not agreeing with it. But this is ultimately what's going to happen when we have the formation of this Super League. Another fallout from this is that for all of you folks that are so upset that Notre Dame continues to not join the conference, well, your wish is finally going to be granted. When we get this Super League, Notre Dame is going to have no choice but to join the Big Ten. Because at that point, with how big the new media rights deal is going to be, there's too much money that Notre Dame will be leaving on the table just to remain independent. NBC isn't going to have enough money to cut the big enough check that Notre Dame would receive if they were to join the Big Ten in this Super League. And another issue is that if Notre Dame doesn't join the Super League, they want to try to remain independent, then they're just going to be the odd man out. They're just going to say, you know what? You can just die with the rest of the NCAA. You can just stay on a sinking ship. And Notre Dame, they are a team that does have a big fan base. They draw a big amount of ratings. They also have a really large fan base. So I'm pretty confident that they will get membership into the Big Ten. I know that they tried to get membership in the Big Ten in the past and they were denied twice, but this is a lot different. They want Notre Dame to be a part of this. And if Notre Dame still wants to try to finagle their way, still try to come to some sort of agreement, then what's going to happen is they're not going to have an opportunity to get into the playoffs. And then two, they're just going to be left out. They're going to be isolated. The SEC and the Big Ten, they're not cutting no deals. You either join them, you're part of the fight, or you're against the fight, and you side with the NCAA. And it just makes too much sense for Notre Dame to be a part of this. You're either in the club, or you're going to be watching from the parking lot. And then the last repercussion of the formation of College Football Super League is that the ACC is going to implode. They don't want just anybody joining this thing. The Big Ten, the SEC, they're going to snag Miami, FSU, Clemson, North Carolina, Georgia Tech, and then whoever is left from the ACC once those teams are snatched up, they probably end up just joining the Big 12. The Big 12 is going to be part of this Super League. They're not going to have the same leverage, the same power that the SEC and the Big 10 have, but they're not small enough that you can leave them out. But they're not big enough to the point where you have to give them a large say. They're just lucky to just be there. They're just the fallout of the scraps. The misfits, the smaller programs that nobody really wants. That's how the Big 12 can stay afloat. And they probably just come to an agreement with the merger with the ACC. That just makes a lot of sense. The ACC has no chance in hell of surviving this thing. And the rest of the G5 schools, maybe the Big 12 wants to snag up a Boise State, a Colorado State, or San Diego State. But for the rest of those schools, I really don't know what to say for them. They're just going to be having the hope and pray that these super leagues or this super conference has some mercy on them, and they're still able to come to somewhat of an agreement with them. But the Super League is coming, people. And it's coming a lot faster than what a lot of us thought it would. Some were saying that it was 2031, 2035. I really believe with the comments that Greg Sankey just uttered out of his mouth a few days ago, that's kind of foreshadowing that there are already steps being taken behind the scene, that this process is probably going to happen within a year or two from now.